It began with an envelope, stamped with the golden seal of the Vatican, addressed to the office of Donald J. Trump. It traveled silently across the Atlantic. What it contained would ignite a storm of speculation, provoke fierce debate, and send a message that echoed far beyond Rome or Washington. The content was simple, a formal, respectful, yet unmistakably firm refusal. Pope Leo XIV, Supreme Pontiff of the Catholic Church, had declined Trump's invitation to a private Vatican tour, a gesture the former president had envisioned as a monumental meeting of two global power figures. But it wasn't the rejection itself that shocked the world. It was the statement that followed. The Church does not lend its sacred halls for displays of power. Leadership demands humility, not applause. Before we uncover the true weight of this moment, take a second to subscribe to our channel. These stories don't just inform, they reveal the hidden truths shaping our world. To understand why this single rejection rippled across international headlines, we need to know who Pope Leo XIV really is. Born Manuel Herrera in Córdoba, Argentina, he was not destined for the papacy. A Jesuit priest who rose quietly through the ranks, he became known for his grassroots work with impoverished communities in the slums of Buenos Aires. When the conclave elected him, many were stunned, not by scandal or controversy, but by his simplicity. He refused the papal apartments. He traveled without fanfare. He often walked alone through Vatican City without security. In a world obsessed with image, Leo XIV made himself almost invisible. Donald Trump, by contrast, is perhaps the most visible political figure of the 21st century. A billionaire turned president turned media icon, Trump has never shied away from spectacle. His post-presidency has been marked by relentless rallies, a fortified media presence, and continuous attempts to reassert influence both domestically and globally. For Trump, power is visibility, and visibility is victory. So when Trump extended the invitation, an offer for an exclusive televised walkthrough of the Vatican's inner sanctums, it wasn't merely a tour, it was a move. A gesture aimed at rebranding, at aligning himself with a centuries-old symbol of spiritual authority. To some it was audacious, to others brilliant. To Pope Leo XIV it was something else entirely. The Vatican's response arrived within days, but it was not private. The Holy See released a carefully worded statement to global news outlets. The Holy Father has chosen not to participate in any event that may confuse spiritual service with political display. We pray for all leaders to seek wisdom in silence and service. The backlash was immediate. Conservative commentators accused the Pope of political bias. Trump allies called it an insult. The Pope turned down an olive branch, said one pundit. He chose division over dialogue. Trump himself responded with a Truth Social post that read, "Very sad to see the Vatican fall for the same elitist games. Faith should unite, not judge." But amid the firestorm, others saw something deeper. Was this merely a scheduling conflict cloaked in diplomacy? Or was it a moral stance, one leader quietly saying to another, "Not like this"? As news anchors debated and headlines screamed, something unexpected began to happen. The public wasn't just interested, they were captivated, not by scandal, but by silence, not by drama, but by the dignity of refusal. It was no longer just about a declined invitation. It was about two visions of leadership colliding, one rooted in quiet strength, the other in bold assertion. And for the first time in a long time, people began to wonder, which one truly holds power? As the Pope's words reverberated through the media, they ignited a firestorm that showed no signs of dying. Newsrooms scrambled, talk shows erupted. In homes, churches, and political circles, debates flared over the meaning behind the Vatican's decision. Was it a spiritual line in the sand, or just another ripple in the tempest of post-Trump politics? Cable networks framed it like a chess match. Pundits speculated on the optics, dissecting every syllable of the Vatican statement. Supporters of Trump claimed the Pope's silence was a mask for elitism, a rejection not of showmanship, but of one of the world's most scrutinized figures. Meanwhile, critics framed the moment as a watershed, proof that moral clarity still held weight in an age of noise. At the center of it all stood Pope Leo XIV, And as the world tried to understand his stance, the Pope remained characteristically silent, yet his past began to speak volumes. Born into a working-class family in Argentina, Manuel Herrera grew up during an era of political brutality. He was a teenager when he watched his parish priest dragged away for giving shelter to dissidents. That moment, as he would later confide to close aides, carved the meaning of courage into my bones. His journey into the Jesuit order was marked not by ambition, but by a desire to serve where the world looked darkest. He tended to orphans, walked among the forgotten, and refused appointments to higher office until he no longer could. His elevation to the papacy came after a period of institutional turmoil and declining trust. But instead of tightening the grip of tradition, he loosened it. He redefined papal authority not as command, but as example. His messages were often uncomfortable, his audiences quiet. But wherever he went, people leaned in to listen. By contrast, Donald Trump had never whispered. His ascent was a thunderclap, fueled by branding, defiance, and a mastery of the media landscape. His political career had not just survived scandal, it had thrived on it. Even in the face of impeachment, legal trials, and international controversies, Trump remained a figure impossible to ignore. The Vatican's refusal wasn't just personal to Trump, it was provocative. And while he publicly dismissed it, calling it a misunderstanding of what unity looks like, privately he fumed. He demanded briefings, he questioned loyalty. He saw the Pope's move not as religious, but strategic. In response, Trump enlisted a new spiritual advisor, Sarah Whitaker, a rising evangelical star with a fervent online following. Young, charismatic, and unapologetically political, Sarah saw the moment as divine confrontation. "This is not just about Rome and Trump," she preached in a viral sermon. "This is about light versus shadows, about reclaiming sacred ground from those who've forgotten the fire." Within the Vatican, concerns began to stir. Cardinal Bianchi, one of the Pope's most trusted confidants, urged caution. "Your Holiness, silence has power, but it also leaves space for distortion. Should we clarify the message?" Leo XIV shook his head gently. "If truth needs noise to be known, it is not truth." While headlines tried to pit faith against politics, something deeper was happening. The public, tired of scandals, spin, and spectacle, was hungry for something real. Something unspoken, perhaps, but deeply felt. And as the days passed, the question grew louder, even in silence. What does leadership look like in a world that no longer listens? The tension didn't just simmer, it flared. After weeks of speculation and carefully worded statements, Donald Trump made a move that stunned both political and religious circles. From a rally stage in Dallas, he issued a bold challenge, a televised conversation with Pope Leo XIV. "Let's talk about faith, let's talk about truth, let's talk about what real leadership looks like," he declared, his voice rising over chants of support. "I respect the Pope, but I think he's wrong, and I think the world deserves to hear why." The proposal hit global media like a lightning bolt. For some, it was a stroke of genius, a way to frame Trump as both challenger and seeker. For others, it was the final proof that he viewed religion as just another arena for spectacle. The Vatican, however, responded swiftly and succinctly. The Holy Father declines any invitation that frames dialogue as performance. True discernment is not found on stages. That was it. No elaboration. No negotiation. And yet the refusal felt louder than any broadcast. It was a clear rejection, not of conversation, but of confrontation disguised as faith. Privately, Leo XIV confided to a fellow cleric, "When a man asks to speak before listening, he is not seeking truth, he is seeking victory." These words weren't published, but in the quiet circles of the Curia, they spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, both men were reflecting in very different ways. Pope Leo XIV found his thoughts drifting back to a defining moment in his youth. He had been 17 when the military police came for Father Ortega, his parish priest and mentor. Ortega had been hiding a mother and her 2 children, who were fleeing a violent regime. As soldiers screamed and dragged the priest away, he made no sound, just looked at Manuel, the boy who would become pope, and touched his chest. A silent signal. Hold to the truth. That silence had shaped Leo XIV's understanding of power, not through speeches, not through defiance, but through the unshakable weight of moral presence. Now, decades later, he faced a world that demanded volume. And yet he chose silence again. Trump's reflection, however, came from a different place. Alone one evening at Mar-a-Lago, he pulled out a dusty photo album from his private library. One photograph showed him and Melania standing in the Vatican's Sistine Chapel years earlier. He had looked upward then, not for the cameras, but because he had genuinely been struck by the sheer majesty of Michelangelo's ceiling. "That place," he muttered, "makes you feel small, even me." It was a moment rarely seen, vulnerable, unguarded, but it passed quickly. The next morning he doubled down. "The Pope talks a lot about silence," he tweeted, "but silence won't fix the world's problems. Action will." Sarah Whitaker, energized by the unfolding drama, announced a new prayer movement, Fire Upon the Vatican. Her message was confrontational. "They've shut their doors. We'll open heavens." Within hours, the campaign trended globally. Commentators began parsing the divide. This wasn't simply political, it was philosophical. Two visions of leadership clashing, one rooted in dominance, declarations, and charisma, the other grounded in contemplation, restraint, and sacrifice. Yet for many observers, it wasn't the noise that moved them. It was the Pope's refusal to respond in kind. The decision not to play the game. In a world saturated with arguments, his silence had become a strange kind of thunder. And people were still listening. It began with no announcement, no cameras, no press release, but word spread fast. Pope Leo XIV would deliver an unscheduled homily from St. Peter's Basilica. The crowd gathered slowly at first, then surged. By sunrise, the square was overflowing with people, from devout pilgrims to curious tourists, from Vatican loyalists to skeptical onlookers. They weren't drawn by spectacle. They were drawn by the silence that had spoken louder than any sermon, and they came to hear what silence would now say. When the Pope stepped onto the podium, he carried no prepared script. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "The world," he began, "has confused volume with truth, but power is not proven by who shouts loudest. It is revealed by who serves longest." He didn't mention Trump, not once, yet every word pulsed with relevance. "We look into the mirror of power," he said, "and often we do not see ourselves, but who we wish to appear. Power tempts us to perform instead of transform, to dominate, not deliver. It is a mirror that flatters and distorts." People held their breath. "The test of a leader," he continued, "is not how many follow them when they speak. It is how many remain when they fall silent." The square fell quiet. No chants, no applause, just listening. Somewhere in Florida, Trump watched the live stream on a flat screen in his private lounge. Surrounded by aides and advisors, he leaned back in his chair, arms folded. No one spoke. For a moment, his face was unreadable. Eyes locked on the screen, jaw set, his usual performative energy gone. The Pope's words weren't attacks, they weren't threats, and that made them harder to dismiss. "He's preaching at me without naming me," Trump muttered eventually. But even as he said it, his tone lacked conviction. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the manicured lawns of Mar-a-Lago. "You ever think," he asked no one in particular, "that maybe silence makes a man more dangerous than words?" Behind him, Sarah Whitaker stiffened. She recognized the shift, and she didn't like it. "Don't let their silence fool you," she said, stepping closer. "This is a war of ideas. They want to shame you into surrender. That's not leadership, it's manipulation." Trump didn't answer. He simply turned back to the television, where the Pope's image now faded into a view of the crowd, still standing, still listening. Hours later, something unexpected happened. The Vatican courier, clad in the traditional crimson cassock, delivered a private letter to Trump's residence. No press. No publication. No leaks. The envelope bore only the papal seal. The contents to this day remain unknown. But the impact was immediate. Trump cancelled his planned press conference. He postponed a major rally. For 48 hours, his social media accounts went silent, an anomaly that set off frenzied speculation. When he re-emerged, it was not with fire, but with something closer to contemplation. In a brief statement to reporters, he said only, "Leadership means listening, and sometimes listening means hearing things you'd rather not. I'm doing that now. No apologies, no retractions, just a pause." And in a political landscape shaped by noise, that pause was deafening. As both figures withdrew into their respective domains, the world waited, not for confrontation, but for revelation. What had passed between them in that sealed letter? What had changed in those hours of quiet? No one knew. But for the first time in a long time, uncertainty felt like hope. Weeks passed. The headlines quieted. Social media moved on to newer dramas. But for those who had followed the strange confrontation between the Pope and the former president, the silence that lingered afterward felt louder than any of the noise that came before. In a subtle but unmistakable shift, Donald Trump's tone changed. Not overnight and not completely, but noticeably. At a campaign stop in Michigan, he spoke less about enemies and more about duty. In a radio interview, he praised the discipline of leaders who choose reflection over reaction. And at a private fundraiser, he reportedly told donors, "You learn things when you stop trying to win every second." He never mentioned the Pope directly again, nor did he refer to the letter that had arrived under Vatican seal, but those close to him noticed the difference. Shorter speeches, longer pauses, a deliberate quiet between the usual bravado. Some chalked it up to strategy, others to fatigue. But a few, those who had seen him at his most guarded, believed something fundamental had shifted, not broken, not reversed, but stirred. Pope Leo XIV, for his part, returned to his quiet routines. No public statements, no follow-up sermons. In a Christmas message weeks later, he addressed the world as he always did, gently, simply, and with conviction. "May we remember," he said, "that truth is not always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it is the one still standing when all others have faded." That was the last reference, even indirect, to the episode that had gripped global attention. Historians would later dissect the moment. Scholars would debate the motivations. Some argued it was a battle of images, a pope refusing to be pulled into the orbit of a media empire. Others saw it as a theological clash, performative piety versus practiced humility. But for most people, it was something more instinctive. It was the rare occasion when a leader didn't rise to the bait. When a refusal to engage became a moral statement all its own, what impact did it truly have? That remains uncertain. Trump continued his political campaign, adjusted but undeterred. Leo XIV remained the spiritual shepherd of 1.3 billion Catholics, serene in his silence. But for millions watching, the exchange left a mark. In a world addicted to drama, here was a confrontation without shouting. A disagreement without degradation. Two men, profoundly different, forced the world to consider not just what leadership looks like, but what it should feel like. Integrity. That word, thrown around so often it had lost weight, seemed suddenly heavier again, because it had been demonstrated, not declared. If this story moved you, challenged you, or simply made you pause, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We're committed to bringing you more powerful stories that go beyond the surface, narratives that reveal not just what happened, but why it matters. And now, don't stop here. Click on the video on your screen to discover another extraordinary moment in the history of the Vatican, one where silence once again shook the corridors of power. You won't believe who stood against centuries of tradition and what happened next.